Well, good morning, everybody, and we are having a little bit of a late start, so this panel, despite the fact that it does address one of the most complex issues in the whole world, is going to last a little shorter. I prepared a long introduction, but since I am probably the least knowledgeable person on the stage about the issue, I'm going to forego the introduction that I prepared. I'm just going to start out by saying that my closest encounter with the Korean issue was at a time when I served as president of the United Nations General Assembly in 2013, when one of the nuclear tests was performed by the North Korea. And I was in office, and I very well remember the early morning when this became news, and when I had very agile conversations since early morning with my American colleague, with my South Korean colleague. Everybody asked me to call for a session of the General Assembly, an emergency session, and I said, of course, I will do that, but I need to talk to the ambassador of North Korea first. So I invited to my office the ambassador of North Korea, and I asked him, "Sir, there are deep concerns about what took place last night in North Korea." And he asked me, "What happened?" And I said, "Well, actually, the whole world is talking about this, and there seems to be a nuclear test that was performed." And he said, "That is not true. Do not believe the propaganda of the West." So I must admit that I was puzzled with this conversation, but nonetheless, we did proceed to hold a session of the General Assembly. But that was my closest call with the issue that has been dominating the agenda of international relations for decades, and especially in the last year and a half, there were some turbulent developments, from fire and fury and nuclear buttons to a bunch of smiles and handshakes and a very hopeful discourse, according to many observers in this particular case. But as I said, I'm going to stop there. I'm not going to speak more about the issue. Here on the stage, we have some really impressive group of people. On my immediate left is Ц.Элбэгдорж, former president of Mongolia and a dear friend of mine, actually a classmate of mine from graduate school. He was the leader of the peaceful democratic revolution in Mongolia in 1990s, and served as member of parliament, chairman of the major party in Mongolia, as well as prime minister prior to becoming president, having served 2 terms as president. He's a commissioner right now for the International Commission Against the Death Penalty, and a patron of the World Sustainable Development Forum, a proud graduate from Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School of Government. Then we have Wang Jixi, one of China's leading thinkers and most respected intellectuals. He's the professor of the School of International Studies and president of the Institute of International and Strategic Studies at Peking University. He was a global scholar at Princeton. He's an honorary president of the Chinese Association for American Studies. And for many years, he served as a member of the Foreign Policy Advisory Committee of China's Foreign Ministry. He holds many other affiliations, and is also a director of the Institute of International Strategic Studies at the Central Party School of the Communist Party of China. Then we have Douglas Powell, vice president for studies at Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He previously served as vice chairman of J.P. Morgan Chase International, but he was unofficial U.S. representative to Taiwan. as director of the American Institute in Taiwan, 2002 to 2006. He was in the National Council staffs of Presidents Reagan and George H.W. Bush, and he also worked in U.S. embassies in Singapore and Beijing. Also a Harvard University graduate. Then we have, well, the order is slightly different. I was about to introduce a Russian, but it's definitely not a Russian. Mr. Yim Sung-jun, senior advisor at Lee International IP and Law Group. Previously, he held the position of president of the Korea Foundation. Served for many years in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of South Korea. Amongst other posts, he held the position of ambassador to Canada in Egypt. Served also as deputy minister of Foreign Affairs. Graduated from Seoul National University, Oxford University, and Keio University. Hosoya Yuichi is the professor at the Faculty of Law at Keio University in Japan. Previously, he was an assistant professor at Hokkaido University. He was a visiting researcher at Princeton, visiting professor at Sciences Po in Paris. He's a former member of the advisory board at Japan's National Security Council. He was part of the Prime Minister's advisory panel on reconstruction of the legal basis, as well as on national security and defense capabilities. And last but not least is Georgy Toloraya, one of Russia's foremost experts on Korean affairs. He served in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia, but he also served in Russia's embassies both in the North and in the South Korea. He is currently Director of Korean Programs at the Institute of Economy at the Russian Academy of Science, and Professor of Oriental Studies at the McGill, Executive Director of the Russia's National Committee on BRICS Research. Without further ado, I'm going to give floor to President Ц.Элбэгдорж. And I'm going to ask you a question because you did visit North Korea more than once, and you were very active as president in inter-Korean dialogue. You gave a famous speech in Pyongyang about democracy. It's a fascinating topic to be discussed there. So, Mr. President.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to express my gratitude to Terre de Montbral, bringing all of us here, and also to the Kingdom of Morocco, our auspicious host. And to the topic of North Korea, I had a chance of meeting many people from the North Korean leadership circle, and also professors and security experts, and even defectors from North Korea. But I thought sometime that change can be done in North Korea. You know, Mongolia had a similar political establishment like in North Korea, and now Mongolia is one of the free and liberal establishment. But this kind of change, as we did in my country, it never going to happen in North Korea in a face of this dictatorship. And I am not believer that North Korean society is going to change and led by their leadership. In terms of the North Korean nuclear issue, I think there are three big factors. And the first factor is many people think that the North Korean young leader is only one leader there, but he has a very experienced and tested elderly leaders team. And they usually say that we made more than 10 administrations of America, 10 presidents. That's the very experienced team he has. And the second is second largest economy and power on his backyard. And third, of course, I think North Koreans this regime has a great ability to hide things. And I know that many people think that North Korea can be rid of the nuke. I'm also not a believer in that. If people ask questions, I will answer to that. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you for being brief. So my next question relates to China. And a lot of people are saying that, Professor Wang, China seemed to be the biggest winner out of the current trajectory, if this current trajectory is sustained. So number one, do you believe in this? And number two, everybody that is involved in the process talks about the red lines in the process. Are there any red lines for China as we move on?
Thank you, Chairman. I think, yes, in terms of security, China is very happy with the recent thaw of tensions between the United States and North Korea and the improvement of South-North relations. However, many in China's policy circles have the suspicion that whether it is a question whether Kim Jong-un is very sincere in his commitment to denuclearization. So in a sense, China is a beneficiary because the bottom line of China's policy toward North Korea is no conflict. And North Korea's political survival is very important to China. Another thing China is scared about is denuclearization that North Korea is committed to. But there are suspicions in China toward both the United States and North Korea. And I think most Chinese in political circles say that the United States, rather than North Korea, is the major source of instability. They see that the United States is targeting at North Korea superficially, but the long-term target is not North Korea, but China. Look at THAAD, for instance. It is designed, the Americans say that THAAD is directed against North Korea. But most people, military specialists in China, are saying that THAAD is against China. And there are even suspicions that North Korea could reach a tacit understanding or some kind of agreement that the North Koreans can keep some of the nuclear devices if they are not threatening the United States. So the worry is that in the long run, you see the nuclear weapons kept in North Korea could be turned against China because it is closer to China. And along with the improvement of North Korean, U.S., North Korean, South Korean relationship, China might lose something. That is a worry because most Chinese see the United States as a major security threat. Whether Kim Jong-un and Trump will talk about China, in what way they will refer to China? Will Kim Jong-un say very good things about China in his discussion with Trump? Or will Trump say very good things about China in his discussion with Kim Jong-un? The Chinese are very suspicious. But then also the Americans are suspicious as well because they don't know what Kim Jong-un and Xi Jinping talked about in their 3 rounds of conversations in China. And Xi Jinping may go to North Korea for a state visit maybe in the next few months. So we don't know exactly what is happening. But one thing that is very peculiar between China and North Korea is their long-term ideological affinity. That ideological affinity has existed ever since the two communist parties took power in the late 1940s. And lately, China sends its very high-ranking official by the name of Li Zhanshu to North Korea to join the celebration of North Korea's establishment or their anniversary, 70th anniversary of the establishment of the DPRK. And I think the Chinese highly value the party-to-party relationship, or even the top priority is a party-to-party relationship rather than state-to-state relationship. So I don't know whether when the two communist parties get together, they will talk more about denuclearization of North Korea or their common grounds in resisting Americans' scheme to undermine the Communist Party's leadership. So this is something we have to keep in mind. And as I said before, the worst scenario in Chinese mindset is that the United States may prefer to keep the nuclear threat alive so that they can justify and perpetuate U.S. military presence in Northeast Asia and to maintain U.S. security alliances with Japan and South Korea. So I think this kind of distrust is not a plus in U.S.-China relations, and that will endure for the time being. When the U.S.-China relationship is worsening, as we see it today, some in Beijing are further convinced that Washington is definitely trying to take advantage of its newly establishment of ties with Pyongyang at the expense of China. And finally, my point is that the official position toward the North Korean nuclear issue in China will remain consistent. But given the softening of attitude of the Moon government and the Trump administration toward the DPRK, China is expected to resume economic cooperation with North Korea with less constraint. So my conclusion is that the likely outcome may be North Korea's gestures of denuclearization, plus some superficial or artificial dismantlement of its nuclear sites in exchange of eased international sanctions and increased foreign trade. The DPRK may win broader international recognition without sacrificing the essence of the nuclear capacity. However, if its demands are not satisfied, Pyongyang may again resort to the threatening of force. I hope I'm not right in this regard.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Wang. I have to remind everybody that we are running slightly short in time, so I'm going to move right away to Dr. Pal. And I had like a series of interesting questions, but I'm going to just ask you a very simple question under the circumstances. South Korea's and America's interests seem to be not fully aligned, at least in the last few weeks. There were a lot of bickering between Seoul and Washington. How do you see the trajectory of American and South Korean interest as we move forward in this process?
Well, thank you, Chairman, and thank you for World Policy Conference and Thierry de Montbrial for the invitation to be here today with my wonderful colleagues. To go directly to your question, I think as I try to write the story of the last few years on the Korean Peninsula with the emergence of new leaders in North and South Korea and in China 5 years ago, and our of course, President Trump. The main players are all pursuing different objectives, and the storylines intersect in very strange ways. Just a year ago, when we talked on this subject here in Marrakesh, it was all about fire and fury. The Trump administration had been enormously successful, despite its anti-diplomatic tendencies, in mounting a huge diplomatic campaign of UN Security Council sanctions, and often unnoticed beyond that, tremendous cooperation to constrain North Korea's diplomatic and economic activities beyond the sanctions around the world. And maximum pressure was being put on North Korea at the end of last year. Who would have guessed we'd be here today after that? And I have to give a lot of credit to the South Korean president for his initiatives in this. There were interchanges between North and South Korea. We don't know what happened before January 1st. But on January 1st, Kim Jong-un made a speech in which he said his nuclear and missile ambitions were essentially satisfied, and he wanted to then take care of the needs of the people and the economy of North Korea, together with these assurances of national security through defense measures, nuclear capabilities. And the South Korean leader, Moon Jae-in, was able to return to his faction, his party's long-term interest in improving relations with North Korea, bringing down the barriers between the North and the South, and enhancing economic and other interaction with the North. And he took the initiative to, with whatever had taken place in North Korea that led to the January 1 speech of having both guns and butter, he took the initiative with the Winter Olympics to get the process going. And the US, if you remember at that time, Vice President Pence arrived at the Olympics and looked kind of stunned. He didn't know what to do. We were supposed to be maximum opposed to anything with North Korea, and everybody was applauding the North Korean teams. They were happy to mix together, and it looked very awkward for the US. Now fast forward to where we are today, and we have gone from a position of absolute opposition to the continuation, the so-called comprehensive, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization of North Korea, to something which in reality, that's now got a new name, but in reality is an acknowledgement that we have a new member in the club. We're not going to give them a pass, but like Israel, like India, there's a new nuclear power in the world, and North Korea is it. Now the question is on what terms? What do we want them to do to reduce their capacity to make more weapons, whether closing Yongbyon facility down or some other facilities? I think we've gone from having very unrealistic expectations to having much more modest expectations of what can be achieved through bilateral negotiations. And I think President Trump is prepared to declare victory fairly soon, maybe at this next summit, where he'll say we're satisfied that progress has been made, that threats have been reduced. Our people will continue to talk about eventual denuclearization, but that's a distant horizon, not even a prospect, just a distant horizon. And Trump will have satisfied the American desire to keep the Koreas separate from China, because your Cold War strategy requires that we maintain the alliance structure, however dissatisfactory the terms of the alliance may be. And at the same time, he will have a greater ability to pressurize South Korea to take the terms that he dictates for the relationship. And this will have a knock-on effect on Japan as well, because their calculation is that South Korea and Japan do not have an alternative in the shadow of giant China to being allies of the US, but the US will be in a position to set the terms. So in all of this, the South Korean president has been soldiering on in his own purposes, to go back to your question, to establish more and more linkages, trying not to transgress the lines drawn by the UN Security Council resolutions, but increasingly doing so. And so what we have is a situation at the end of this process where China's a big winner, as you asked Professor Wong earlier. In my view, that's true. South Korea's leader is a big winner politically. That may not be sustainable in a democracy. North Korea is a big winner in this. And Trump, at least for the moment, is seen by Americans as having gone from threatening fire and fury to being in a love affair with the North Korean leader. And it's actually selling with the American people that he's brought peace. So it's a four-way win out of a very messy situation.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Yim, same question. Are you diverging? Are you starting to diverge with your interests with the United States? And generally, what's your view of the situation?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. For the floor. Well, it's always a great pleasure for me to be at WPC and sitting in the prominent panel like this. Well, it's very embarrassing that I was preempted by my old friend. For the presentation I'm going to make in this panel. Well, we worked together a long time ago when we had the first North Korean nuclear crisis. Well, Doug was a White House official, and I was assigned in Washington working at the embassy. So we had to face, the first North Korean crisis. But the good thing is that we always, were on the same page. So it was extremely easy to work with Doug, which means good, cooperation between my government and the U.S. administration. Well, I think he aptly presented, the overview of what's happening, this year and what happened last year. So last year, I was sitting in the same panel saying that South Korea faced the most dangerous national security crisis since the Korean War. Well, North Korea continued provocation by making nuclear bombs and launching long-range missiles. Well, there was a dramatic turnaround, coming into the beginning of this year. Well, as Dr. Pal said, President Moon utilized the momentum of the Winter Olympics at Pyeongchang in Korea, and he induced North Korea to come to the peace process on the Korean Peninsula and invited North Korean leader Kim Jong-un to the summit table. So he succeeded in inducing Kim Jong-un and even succeeded in mediating first ever held summit between the US president and North Korean leader. So everybody was excited, to see what would happen when President Trump and Kim Jong-il meet, in the scheduled summit. Well, we have seen, the great fanfare and the great, summit which was held in Singapore. And as a North Korean negotiator, I had very high expectations from the result of the summit meeting between President Trump and Kim Jong-un. But I was, very shocked, to see the contents of the Singapore agreement, which was printed, later. Well, I think, President Trump made a misstep, in inducing North Korea to the full and complete denuclearization. Well, if you look at the contents, the language, they expressed in the statement is the North Korean language, not our language. Well, South Korea and the United States set the goal, for the denuclearization as CVID, complete, verifiable, irreversible dismantlement or denuclearization. But what they said is the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, which has been used all the time by North Korea. Why not North Korea, but the whole Korean Peninsula, which includes South Korea? We don't have nuclear weapons. We never developed a nuclear project. But The only thing, we have in South Korea is the U.S. nuclear protection, U.S. nuclear umbrella. So by, mentioning the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, which means, the U.S. should withdraw the nuclear umbrella protection for South Korea. And even with the, North Korean language, they agreed, 3 points. Number one was to normalize the relations between North Korea and the United States. Number two, peace initiative or peace regime to be established on the Korean Peninsula. Number three, denuclearization. So it gave rise to the sequencing problem. North Korea will insist that U.S. must act first, to normalize or to have, regular relations with North Korea before North Korea moves for denuclearization. So this is the, problem. Mr. Trump, he never understood, or I don't know, but what happened. And Kim Jong-un was doing very good job, fully assisted by the institutional memory of the North Korean bureaucracy. But Mr. Trump, I don't know what happened between himself and the very, capable bureaucrats at the State Department and the DOD. So there seems to be some, gap between the White House and other bureaucratic institutions of the United States. I strongly believe, I trust, the State Department officials and the U.S. military, and I think that they will handle, this issue well down the road. But now, Kim Jong-un wants to have second summit with Mr. Trump. Why? Well, I think he can play around with Mr. Trump, and so he doesn't want to have some working level negotiations to resolve this issue, but he wants to get close to Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump said they are in love, and he likes the love letters from Kim Jong-un all the time, and keeps the letter in his pocket.
Thank you.
So, I think still we have impediments, obstacles, before we realize the full denuclearization of North Korea. But we cannot go back to the confrontation we saw last year, but we have to keep North Korea on the table with our leverage, which is international sanctions. We had two leverages until last year. We had strong military combined forces between the United States and South Korea. But after the Singapore summit, Mr. Trump let it go, and the no more combined military exercises between the US forces and South Korean military. So we lost one leverage, but we still have another effective leverage, which is international sanctions led by the United States and the United Nations. So we have to keep going until we see the change of North Korea in a genuine and in sincerity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Yim. And now I'm going to go to Professor Yuichi. Are you as cautious and skeptical in Japan, and where do you see this trajectory going from Japan's perspective?
Thank you very much, Chairman. And I also like to
I think the microphone might not be working.
use microphone here.
There is a
Thank you
That
very
works
much.
now.
Microphone is on. Thank you very much, Chairperson. And also, I'd like to thank the organizer for including me, or I should say, including Japan in this session. Because by sitting here, I think that I can give you an impression that Japan is not marginalized or isolated in the process of the negotiation on North Korean issues. Yes, I'm skeptical, but we can have some hope. But basically, I'm skeptical for some reasons. And before that, I'd like to clarify some points regarding of Japanese position to the North Korean issues. Some news media are saying that Japan is marginalized or isolated in the process of North Korean issues. I think this is partly right because Japan didn't join in the Korean War. And armistice agreement of July 27th of 1953 was signed by American forces and Chinese People's Volunteers forces and North Korean forces. Japan didn't join in that process. That's why these three powers are principal parties to talk on peace talks. I mean, the United States, North Korea, and China. And the armistice agreement stipulated to start the peace talk among the four countries: United States, China, North Korea, and South Korea. So it would be natural that Japan actually doesn't join in the process of the peace negotiation. But on the other hand, I also like to say that among the all G7 summit meeting leaders, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is the most experienced leader. He visited Pyongyang in September 2002 together with Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi at the time. And so that's why he joined in the process of the drafting Pyongyang declaration between Japan and North Korea. So he knows the details about the negotiation. Also, at the time when he was a prime minister in 2006 and 2007, the six-party talks, which included Japan, actually published several important statements and joint declarations. And Prime Minister Abe also knows very well about the details of that negotiation and agreement. That's why he knows the detail, and he was betrayed twice. North Korean government betrayed Pyongyang declaration, and North Korean government also betrayed as well joint statement of the six-party talk, which Japanese government actually joined in. And that's why it would be natural for Japanese government to be skeptical to North Korean issues. So what the Prime Minister Abe or Japanese government is doing is not to isolate or contain North Korea, but to try to persuade North Koreans to come back to the original position of agreement, which North Korean government itself actually agreed and accepted. So that's why it would be possible to see that the Japanese position is tough. Japanese position is tough because international community actually has been retreating from the position which international community agreed in 2005, 2006, and 2008 in United Nations and also in six-party talk. But besides, let me end to add one point. Japan can play also a very significant role in the process of the reconstruction of North Korea. Once rapprochement and peace talk can be advanced, because in the Pyongyang Declaration, Japanese government agreed that once peace treaty was concluded, Japan would provide economic assistance to North Korea as a kind of war reparation. I mean, in 1965, at the time of the basic treaty between Japan and South Korea, Japan started economic assistance to South Korea. That's why Japan was willing to provide equal amount of economic assistance to North Korea. It means that North Korea can get huge amount of economic assistance from Japan, and this would be essential foundation for, I think, reconstruction of North Korean economy. That's why at some point, I think that North Korea would be willing to invite Japan to join in some talk on the reconstruction of the country. But if North Korea doesn't like to invite Japan for having economic assistance from Japan, maybe Japan can be happy because we don't have to pay it. But I think that because it is written in the Pyongyang Declaration, that's why it is quite probable that Japan will join in the process of economic construction of North Korea. But I like to end that, but I'm quite skeptical because like Ambassador Im already mentioned, because the international community, particularly President Trump, has been retreating from the previous agreements because President Trump has no interest in details of the negotiation, and it will kill the stability in the region and destabilize the region. And we will see perhaps a structural change in international politics, which President Trump has no intention to do that. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Yuichi. So we now move to Professor Talaraya, and you recently wrote, Professor, you asked yourself and the audience a question: who needs to make peace with whom in this situation? And I was really talking about the new peace regime as a conclusion of this process, or a reconfiguration of a previous arrangement. So along those lines, and with the question about Russia in general, Russia doesn't seem to have been in the forefront of this, but Russia is a member of the Security Council, a permanent member, and Professor Ichi was talking about perhaps Japan feeling a little marginalized in this process. Is Russia marginalized in this process? And if not, what are Russia's red lines in this, if any?
All right, thank you, Ms. Chair. I've been watching Korea for more than 45 years, and it has always been like a pendulum, swinging from the extreme tension to some kind of detente. But these days, I think that the amplitude of this pendulum is really stunning. I actually knew pretty comparatively well former leader Kim Jong-il, and he once compared his negotiation with the US to a chess game. I believe that the current leader, his son Kim Jong-un, prefers poker, nuclear poker, and the stakes are much higher these days. However, now we have the most peaceful and promising period in the Korean situation for many, many years. And if you ask myself if this persists, this situation would persist, I would just get given Nobel Peace Prize to President Moon, President Trump, and Kim Jong-un. I don't know whether it can be divided on three, but anyway, we have now the most peaceful period, and that actually satisfies almost everyone, apart from conservatives who want to push down North Korea by sanctions and pressure. So is the agreements on the reached in Singapore, reached between North and South Korea, are actually feasible? They are understood as complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization of Korea in exchange for peace guarantees. The problem is that none of these goals are attainable in the first place, and in the short run for sure. What is the security guarantees on the part of the United States? I don't think that maybe Dr. Powell wouldn't agree to me, but I don't think that US system itself gives any possibility for the future government to keep the guarantees the previous government had given. And we see a lot of that kind of US behavior, the latest being the INF Treaty, when obligations and the guarantees are withdrawn or reconsidered. And this is just the nature of US political system, not ill will of this or other rule. So how in that case you could expect North Korea to give up its only guarantee for survival? That's the nuclear card. However, there is an answer. The answer is that the process is more important than the result in this case. As long as negotiations are going on, as long as North Korea phase by phase declines its nuclear program, missile program, it gives up its ideas of developing new weapons, it gives up the danger of proliferation, and at some phase, I think that North Korea would only be left with a small existing nuclear arsenal just to be on the safe side. I think that would be a situation which would be better than the one that we had last year. And Mr. Im mentioned that with the constant nuclear tests and missile tests and danger of big war. I know that the US side have already understand this kind of situation. I met with Ambassador Began last week in Moscow, and now they use the words final, fully verifiable denuclearization. And you can argue what final means. Does final denuclearization include peaceful program, for example, or not? And there is a lot of room for negotiation and reconsidering that. One more thing about North Korea, about them cheating and breaking their obligations. One rule I have acquired over years of dealing with North Koreans, you should understand that they will fulfill the obligations they have taken on them, not the obligations you think they have taken on them. And usually there's a misunderstanding that they must do this and that. If they hadn't agreed to that, they mustn't do and wouldn't do it. So you should be very objective, and so far I think that this negotiation progress should go on and on and on. And the longer it goes, the better it is for both regional cooperation and the international order as well. Of course, you can always argue that North Korea keeping its nuclear potential for a prolonged time would deal a blow to the non-proliferation regime. That's true. That's true, but at the same time, I don't think it will be a fatal blow. And in the current situation of the crumbling world order, interlude to some new world order, which we don't know how it will look like. And actually, if you see Russia and US exchanges of harsh words about nuclear containment, you know, it's hard to predict how the situation in the non-proliferation sphere will develop. Maybe it would be better to have North Korea totally give up their nuclear weapons and have the Korean Peninsula fully free of all nuclear danger. That would be better. But, you know, as Mick Jagger said, you can't always get what you want. I think what we can get now is peace process. And this peace process should be guaranteed by the political guarantees of the big powers which are involved in the Korean situation historically. I mean Russian idea on the roadmap, starting from freeze, then negotiations, then multilateral guarantees. And here at this place, we have the countries which should be a part of it. That's China, US, Japan, Russia, and Mongolia, because Mongolia is also a part of the Northeast Asia. So if we reach this stage, I think that that would be a promising stage, and it would take off tension, maybe for a prolonged period of time. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor. I prepared a range of questions, but we're not going to get there because I want to give a chance to the audience to ask questions. So instead of all these questions, which I will have to leave for the next time, I'm going to make a very quick poll of everybody here that sits at the table. Now, I'm going to ask you to give me a yes answer or a no answer, although I know that it's a very complex thing. In 2028, when we gather for the 21st World Policy Conference, is there going to be a single Korean state? I'm not asking you if you like it. I'm not asking you why do you think it's difficult to answer this question. I'm just giving you an option to answer yes or no, your expectation, starting with Mongolia. Is there going to be? No.
No.
China? US? No. South Korea? Japan? Russia? So that's a very, very, very decisive poll. And now I am going to give the chance to the audience to ask questions. Please. Sir, in the first row.
It's open. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Okay.
can, sir.
Look, my name is Don Johnson, and I've had a long interest in this subject as Secretary General of the OECD. Many meetings with Kim Dae-jung in particular, who, by the way, did win the Nobel Prize for the Sunshine Policy. So I'm not sure you can say that there was not progress in the past, because after the joint declaration of 2000, there was a period when Kaesong Park was established, the Hyundai Resort was established, there were investments being made by numerous South Korean countries in the park. And during that period, I suggested the real problem, or one of the problems, which takes me to your idea of reconstruction from Japan, is that the economy was a black box, and it remains a black box. And what's important, I think, for anybody to go in there other than mining companies and others, because there's some important minerals, is to understand the North Korean economy. Now, that's going to require an economic review, which was I was pushing for at the time. And the Americans resisted. Finally, they came around. I got a call from Christopher Hill, the State Department, the six-party talks, said, look, the North Koreans now want development capital, not just humanitarian aid. And they said, that will need a review. And of course, I was thinking of an OECD review, and then I was told later that the North Koreans would never accept that because of the background of the OECD and so on. But nonetheless, that's going to be essential, I think, to follow through with you. Who's going to put capital into reconstructing North Korea without a better idea of how that economy functions? Yes, you may get, and I say the mining sector and resources. That's on the issue of a review. The last point I would make, though, is the one that you raised, Professor, just now about tolerance. That's the issue of securitization. I read this book when I was making a speech on the 10th anniversary of the Joint Declaration from Lim Dong-won, I think it was, who was at one time the Minister of Reunification, I believe. And the book was called Peacemaker, and I read the translation of it. I was very surprised to see that during the six-party talks, Russia has stepped forward and proposed that North Korea be made not a protectorate, but a protected state of the kind of thing you're talking about, guaranteed by the United States, guaranteed by Russia, and guaranteed by China. Now, that struck me as being a very sensible approach to denuclearization. But, you know, from what we've heard from everyone, they're not going to give up their nuclear weapons, we're told at this point. And I was impressed by Lim Dong-won said, let's just get on with it. Can you get on with it? Can you help develop North Korea while they still have nuclear weapons?
We get onto the question?
And separate those two issues. The Americans have never separated those two issues. So if you separate those two issues, if you have an economic review, Japan, everyone else contributes, invite investors in, I think that may be the way to go. But that's, you people are more experts on this than I am.
Thank you. I would like to have a question from the next Do you have a question, sir? Yes. Okay, could you ask the question, please?
Je vais parler en français. Donc, je considère que ce problème de Corée du Nord est vraiment...
Sorry for interrupting you, but it depends on who are you giving the question, because the French might be a problem for some of the panelists here, because there is no translation at this moment. Who are you asking?
Alors, je pose la question à la Corée du Sud. Voilà.
But then we would need to have the translation. I really apologize about this.
This is not working, so I give you this.
Please go ahead, sir.
Okay. Je disais tout simplement que ce problème de Corée du Nord est vraiment un cas d'école en matière de relations internationales, parce qu'on a tout d'abord au premier plan les États-Unis, la Corée du Sud et la Corée du Nord, et en second plan le Japon, la Chine, la Russie et la Mongolie. Et chacun de ces pays défend ses propres intérêts, et ça c'est normal dans les relations internationales. Alors, ma question aux représentants de la Corée du Sud, est-ce que vous n'avez pas plus d'intérêt à vous entendre avec la Corée du Nord pour diminuer l'influence des États-Unis? Et est-ce que l'idéal, bien sûr là je rêve un petit peu, est-ce que l'idéal ne serait pas une conférence internationale regroupant à la fois les pays de premier plan, États-Unis, les deux Corées, et également Japon, Chine, Russie et Mongolie, pour essayer de trouver une solution à long terme. Merci.
Thank you.
Thank you for the excellent question, which South Korea always faced, on how to resolve the Korean Peninsula issues. As you know, geopolitically, the Korean Peninsula was surrounded by big countries like, China, Russia, and Japan, far away, the United States. So we made various sets of countries, to get together to resolve the Korean issues. Three countries, North and South Korea and the United States, and sometimes 4 countries, South, North, China, and the United States, and 6-party talks we have tried, to resolve the North Korean nuclear issue. So I don't think there is, the only formula where we can, put these questions and to, resolve the Korean issue. Now, the problem and the threat comes from North Korea. So I think, we have to have some international formula and, some institutions, to take care of this denuclearization, problem. Now, my President Moon Jae-in, he's an ideologue, and he wants to pursue inter-Korean, peace through 3 countries. First, North and South, and the United States. After that, we can be supported by China and Japan and Russia. So there is no, fixed, formula for doing this. But at the moment, what my president tries to do is to mediate between North Korea and the United States. But, it's a quite difficult, job, shouldered on him. North Korea, hasn't changed. I mean, in terms of tactics. I mean, brinkmanship tactics or salami, slicing tactics. Well, until we really see the change of North Korea, I think it is a difficult, task for my party. So, well, we would like to see some breakthrough. On this issue of denuclearization. Then we have to have some other countries joining to establish peace regime on the Korean Peninsula. China was a party to the Korean War, so China should participate. And Japan is the most, close neighboring country, which could play some role at the later stage. Of course, Russia should do that.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask the last question because we ran out of time, but I do want to ask my friend, President Ц.Элбэгдорж, this question. What do you expect from the second summit if it happens? And it seems like it is going to happen.
Before the first summit, I wrote piece in my Twitter and said, don't rush for the summit, first summit. I think we always forget, we always talk, and we always charmed by the leaders' meeting. We always forget the poor people in North Korea. Don't forget those poor people in North Korea. I think people think that political leaders think that they can have business with the North Korean leader. And I think only from the first summit, one winner, there is Kim Jong-un, North Korean dictator. He got tons of the video, he got tons of the photo opportunity. There is no control in North Korean public relations inside of North Korea.
Are you sure that he was the only winner? Because there may be another winner next week in America.
And if someone sitting from North Korea, ordinary person or who are detained in Gulag, they might say that don't be fooled, don't be fooled with our leaders. If there is only one solution, if there is more continued pressure, maximum pressure on North Korea, I think there might be a solution. But there is no solution when you have that meeting. I think don't forget those poor people. If there is economic assistance, I think those people in a first circle, there are 3 circles. Kim family circle, 10,000 people, and Penyan circle, and the rest of the country. The rest of the country circle never gonna get that assistance. Assistance became the weapon against them. And because of that, when you meet with the North Korean leader, you have to raise issues related with their human rights, with the issue, the situation, how those North Korean poor people are suffering from the Kim dynasty, 3 generations. There is no such dictatorship in the world in modern history, from the grandfather to father and to the grandson. And I think if you put issue about the North Korean people in front of the North Korean leader, I think he might kneel. If you put issue, discussing issues related with the nuke and sitting at equal level with the American president, he will always salvage. And don't be pulled to that. And that's a really bad idea. And I'm really hurted by this kind of meetings and negotiations and photo-ops, but North Korean ordinary people not getting anything from that.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, everybody, for this. It was a fascinating discussion. Join me in the round of applause for our able panelists. Thank you.